Hey y'all, so we have been talking about emotional flooding, so we hope that you guys were able to check out our video that we define emotional flooding, what it looks like, how to tell you're in the middle of it, and some tips about what to do when you are flooded. So now we just kind of want to have a real talk with you guys about what emotional flooding has looked like for us and how we've kind of worked through some of it so that hopefully it can be helpful for you. I can definitely say that in the beginning of our marriage, we've been married, how long have we been married?
Like almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years now. Surprising, right?
Is it?
I don't know. Kind of, I guess. In some ways it feels longer, but...
Well, we've been together for longer than that. But at the beginning of our marriage...
We definitely, I will take full responsibility here and say that I definitely was not... I didn't know what emotional flooding was. Like, who knows that until you hear about it? So whenever we would get into conflict, I think you... Correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't know what it was either, right?
No, I think we really just didn't have the language, which is probably fair for like 99% of married couples when they first kind of start out. But no, I didn't know what emotional flooding was. I know that when we would have conflict, which is normal, I think it would typically go like I would get to this point where I just couldn't think and I would be like flustered. And so typically what would happen is that I would be trying to get out of the situation. I would need a break. And then Megan, in an attempt to solve it and continue through the conflict, would then press in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really, I've reflected a lot about that, over the years, because I vividly remember when we first got married and we would be in conflict and you would be saying, hey, I need a break. I can't talk right now. I need to go off by myself for a little bit. We can talk about this in a little while. And it was like everything inside of me just was so incredibly insecure. I was so fearful of that conflict. I mean, I grew up in a house where my parents fought all the time. So I didn't really see healthy conflict. So when I saw us having conflict, my knee-jerk reaction was, this is bad. We have to fix it right now. You can't leave. We have to fix it right now. So what I would do is I would literally be like, no, we're talking about it right now. I love you. Let's fix it. And you're like, I can't love you. I mean, you didn't say that, but essentially you were trying to tell me that you couldn't hear me. You couldn't love me in that moment. You needed time to decompress and come out of that state that you were in.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, like Megan said, that she was kind of around more arguments growing up. I think that for the most part, my parents didn't really have as many arguments in front of me. So my natural thought process was, I don't want to have an argument. So that kind of played into when I would feel emotionally flooded. Like in the video that we just recorded, I think Megan kind of got emotionally flooded and kind of flipped her lid and unplugged. Kind of took an extreme,
system, right?
Took an extreme action to kind of get
my attention. I've never done that in real life,
right? but yeah, going back to our situation, I was pushing away from that. I didn't want to engage. I felt flooded. I couldn't think. So it was just, kind of a culmination of her experience meets my experience. She's getting flooded and pushing in. I'm getting flooded and drawing back. So it took a while for us to get to the point of really understanding how to best deal with that and come back to arguments so that we could eventually solve them and build some intimacy through disagreements.
Yeah. And I think that's cool too, because I think that, we've talked about intimacy before, there are different types of intimacy, and when you can have healthy conflict with someone, it actually can build intimacy. It doesn't have to disintegrate it or divide or make you feel isolated or alone. I mean, actually now, whenever we get into any kind of a conflict and one of us or both of us, now it's to the point where I need space too, because I recognize that that's what I really need. I need to be able to calm down so we can have a real conversation. But when we come back together, and even when we're apart, I don't feel insecure. I know because our emotional intimacy is so strong that it's going to be okay. I used to feel so insecure about that, and I think that's where we have to really reflect on, why do we do the things that we do in our relationships? Where are these feelings coming from, and are they really that valid? And Clay knows these things about me, so these are good things that your partner can know about you and work on them together. So I think we kind of came to a point after going to marriage conferences and different things where we decided, if we're in a conflict, we're going to do exactly what we proposed in that video that we made earlier, that we'll take a time out and we will come back together after, however much time it takes, whether it is 20 minutes or longer than that. And it's funny because normally, there's sometimes where it's both of us that are frustrated with each other.
Right.
And so we'll be in separate rooms, separate parts of the house, and one of us will, after a while, tiptoe in, kind of are you ready now?
Yeah.
And then if we're not, then that person is like, no.
Give me 5 more minutes.
Yeah. And instead of being are you serious? It's just okay, I respect that you need that time. All right. Mm-hmm. And then that other person will come back and be like, okay, I'm ready now. If you're ready to talk, I'm ready to talk.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a process too, kind of going back to when, we didn't really understand this. There were times where, predominantly Megan would be the one kind of pushing in to solve the argument immediately, and I would be backing off. But there were also times where I specifically remember I might not have necessarily been flooded, and because we hadn't got to the point of having the discussion of how we were going to deal with conflict, she would walk away, and then I would chase her, and I would be like, well, don't you want to talk about this, and all that kind of stuff. So, that's not necessarily helpful, but I think the important thing is, understanding each other, being able to have candid conversations. I know that, Megan, you came to me, I think initially with all that stuff and said, hey, this is how I approach conflict. I'm noticing that you approach conflict in a very different way. Let's figure this out. Let's talk about it. Let's kind of come together so that we make these rules so when we do have conflict, it can end in a beneficial way. Right. As opposed to with us just butting heads.
Right, yeah. Because I think in the beginning, the first couple years of marriage, I thought you were just wrong.
I think she still thinks that a lot.
And I thought you need to just get to the point where we can have conflict right now and talk about it right now, because you should love me enough. You should love me enough that
it was a personality flaw.
Yeah, you don't need time away from me. You don't need to go off. You need to handle it right now. Mm-hmm. And what's so cool, I think, about understanding psychology and understanding how the brain works is that when you understand that when you're in fight or flight mode because you've been triggered by your partner, that your brain is literally not problem solving well, and you understand that it's not a character defect, that it's actually something biological and chemical happening in everyone's brain, then you respond to that differently. And then I'm able to understand, oh, okay, this is your brain. This isn't just you.
Right.
This is your brain, and okay, that makes sense. That gives me more control too. If we understand how the brain works, we can kind of hack it. And that takes away from feeling like, oh, it's just you should be doing something differently.
Well, and I think, because also what you're getting at, a lot of times when we escalate, when we get frustrated and the argument tends to go up and up and up, it's not even necessarily because of something that I did or something that you did. It's because you're not responding the way that I think you should. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you are purposely trying to hurt me, purposely trying to come at me, purposely trying to shut me down. So when you're able to recognize this is your brain and how it works versus my brain and how it works, you can kind of take that potential issue out of the equation.
Yeah.
Potential response out of the equation.
Right, that's so true. And I think that a lot of times it's really been just the moments where we didn't allow ourselves to decompress and we just push in on the argument instead of allowing our brains to kind of reset. Those are moments where it's like you start arguing about, wait, what did you just say to me? I didn't say that. Yes, you did. This is what you just said. And it's just, now you're not talking about the issue. You're just escalating this conflict and now arguing about this stupid stuff, when if you would just both take some time out, it might not have to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really true.
You're avoiding such unnecessary drama.
Yeah, because I think the ultimate point of any conflict is that there's a problem that one person typically sees before the other person, and then you're just trying to solve whatever the problem is, or the conflict or the disagreement, not seeing eye to eye. And eventually, once you get through that problem, you have a greater sense of connection and emotional intimacy and all that kind of stuff. So let's take out all that stuff that tends to get in the way, especially when we're flooded. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And let's just try to create the best possible environment so that we can disagree, problem solve, then come back together, and then it's better than it was.
Right. Then that intimacy, that emotional intimacy, is really that much stronger, and you understand each other better, because then you can come back around and say, hey, okay, let me just explain to you how I really feel. And I can actually say it like that instead of being angry and feel my heart racing and I can't remember anything that I like about you.
Right.
So our greatest takeaway is probably that this information means nothing if you don't actually implement it into your own relationship. And that doesn't mean one person trying to do it. It really has to be both of you.
Right.
So I really encourage you all to sit down with your partner and set parameters for what's going to happen if one or both of you is emotionally flooded, and explain that you're going to allow each other to have these timeouts, but that the biggest caveat is that you will come back together.
Right. I've even talked to clients before about, like, if you have a penalty flag or something, you can make a game out of it. Like when you're talking about it, like, hey, I'm going to throw this penalty flag, and that means we take a timeout, we take a break. It can be whatever you guys agree upon, you and your partner. But you just have to have the conversation so that when you're in the moment, you're not trying to implement these things that you know you should do, but there's no way it's going to happen because you're already flooded and you can't even think in the first place. So it is important to have that conversation, establish ground rules, and then remember, in the end, you're going to have to come back to the conversation so that you can progress and get through the argument.
Right, because if you don't do that, then all you're going to do is breed resentment, and that is not healthy. That's not what we want. And the other thing too is, remember that when you do get space from each other, this is not the time to be replaying what he said, what she said, because all that's going to happen is you're going to keep yourself in that high adrenaline state where you're angry. You need to do something different. Listen to a podcast that makes you happy. Listen to music. Put on some funny videos on YouTube, whatever that looks like. But get out of that mindset. And also, something you have to really try to practice, I think, is remembering in that moment that you actually love that person. Right. Because sometimes when you're in the heat of the moment like that, you just really don't like them.
It's true.
It's true. And I have to tell myself, okay, he's actually pretty great. Mm-hmm. This is really annoying, but overall, like, it's not that big of a deal. Right. Right? Because our focus gets very narrow on the negative, and it's just not going to help anything. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's what we got.
That's our talk on emotional flooding.
Yeah.
Hope that you got something out of it, and looking forward to our next talk.
Yes, which we'll be doing soon, hopefully on the topic of resentment, which goes along with this pretty well.